This is our second segment of episode 3 of the Honourable Truth, the segment that everyone knows as Around the Community. And so for today's Around the Community, we have with us Bridget Saker. She grew up in the local area, and as part of the Bulldogs I Forgive Cup that happened a couple of weeks ago with against Parramatta a couple of rounds ago, Bridget is here to share her own story of forgiveness and compassion and love and faith as well. So before we get to sort of that stuff, Bridget, if you could tell our listeners about your early life and growing up around Sydney.
Sure. Thank you, Nathan. Yeah, look, I'm Bridget, and I actually grew up in the area. I grew up in Ashfield, and my first... I actually went to primary school in Ashfield, St Vincent's, and I then did my high schooling at Bethlehem College. Yep. And my very first job at 14 years and 9 months also was at Summer Hill in a bakery. Summer Hill's completely changed now, but I grew up in the area, was raised in the area, and I did a lot of my sacraments.
All around the local area?
In the local area. Oh. And Ashfield Park was my park that I used to play with as a kid. My dad would take us, and so yeah, very familiar with the area.
And you enjoyed your schooling years?
I loved my schooling years. I loved the community. I loved growing up around people that shared very similar values. Yep. You don't realise as a child you're being raised in a particular way with certain values, and I was raised in the faith environment, in a Christian faith environment, and had some great friends and families, and so I had a very, very good childhood.
Oh, cool. So while you were at school, what sort of careers were you interested in?
That's a very interesting question. So this year being at International Women's Day, I was invited to speak at Bethlehem College, and I hadn't walked through the school for 35 years.
Oh, wow.
But it was interesting because they were looking for, what do you think about doing when you're at school? Where does your life take you? I certainly didn't think I would end up as an executive in a corporate company, heading up a large team, driving strategy and business when I was, even up to year 12. Yeah. Certainly didn't know. I loved talking to people, I loved connecting with people, I loved the idea of growing something, I loved the idea of interacting on a business sense. When I worked at the bakery, I loved that transaction. I loved looking at how we can make things look different in the shop. So I loved that, but I couldn't quite identify what that looked like.
Okay.
So sometimes when you're at school, you have no idea really what you're going to end up doing as a profession. And these days there are so many new industries and new professions that didn't even exist when I was growing up.
And so you ended up as an executive. So
I ended up doing economics at university, and then I studied for 3 years. Graduated very young. I graduated at the age of 20, so I was very young. So in hindsight, I think, God. But I did start as a graduate in the Commonwealth Bank. Okay. All the banks came on campus at Sydney Uni, and I thought, you know what, banking and finance, that holds good stead. Yeah. When you do graduate with a degree like economics or business or marketing, it's very competitive and it's very open to a lot of opportunities. So I end up working for the Commonwealth Bank as a graduate, and then I went into mortgage insurance, and I was there for 23 years. Organically grown, and it did very well, and ended up being an executive for a public listed company.
Oh wow! So how was that? The working life and combining that with your family life as well?
Look, for my situation, working life and, being a mother, it's not easy. You've got to be very organised. You've got to have all the right support, and, your children need you. So being a professional and being a mother, even though I was a better mother for working because I was able to afford things that my children needed. It's difficult to balance. Yeah. So I heavily relied on support. I heavily relied on childcare. Yeah. Getting some support in the house to be able to go out and work and then
be able to provide those things that your kids wouldn't normally be able to have if you weren't working.
Exactly. Extracurricular stuff is expensive. And I was a single mother for a while, so, it depended on me. And being able to do that and still provide the kids the education and health and well-being, it's not easy. If anyone tells you it's easy, it's certainly not. But, you're a role model to your children.
Yeah.
What your children see you do, they end up sort of copying in life. We've got to remember what we do and how we behave. They're taking that in.
Yeah, they are. My little guys do every single day. It's quite scary sometimes when you see your own behaviour or you hear your own phrases back at you.
That's true.
So now I want to ask you and sort of get you to talk about Veronique, your daughter, and what happened there for people that sort of might not know. Sure.
So I have two children.
Yep.
I have Michael, who's now 16, turned 16 last week, and I have Veronique, and Veronique is in heaven. Yep. Veronique was 11 years old, and Michael was 13 and a half at the time the tragedy occurred. And Veronique I dropped Veronique off to her cousin's house. We all had a party, so the kids were going to hang out together. Veronique loved Danny and Layla's kids and the cousins, and she was so excited. And I dropped her off, and they obviously went to get an ice cream, and I never got to pick her up. So, in life you just don't know what happens. I make such an effort now every time Michael leaves the car. I love you, Michael, because you just don't know.
Yeah.
And those children were tragically killed by a driver who was speeding at 130 kilometres on a 50k zone, highly intoxicated on drugs and alcohol. And there were 7 children, not just the 4. There were 7 children. 4 were killed. My daughter landed 20 metres over the fence to the golf course. One is Charbel, who's is seriously suffering now after being in a coma for 2 months. He's got some brain injuries, and obviously there's Mabel and Liana, the other 2 children. One is Danny's other daughter, and one is Charbel, the other cousin sister, and even my son, Michael. I mean, these children, usually children are called resilient, but I don't believe in that resilience. Children are usually the forgotten grievers, and we have to really focus a lot on what children are feeling and going through.
And I wanted to talk to you about that grieving process, or more so get you to talk about the grieving process and sort of what you've learned from it all.
Unfortunately, you don't invite grief to your house. It just, knocks your door down, and you don't have a choice but to take it on. And grief is not linear.
Yeah.
One thing I have found for me and for my family, and I owe it to my parents who raised me with faith and with the Christianity, that there is hope and there is life after death. That with faith, grieving gives you a little bit of strength to get out of bed, because there is hope, because you realise that this life that we're living is not forever. There is life after death, and that's the way we've been raised as Christians, and that's what keeps us going, keeps me going. That everything I do now is to honour Veronique and her cousins. It's to recognise that they are with us. They're in spirit, and everything we do, I've come to terms that there's got to be a greater good out of this tragedy, and that's what our families are doing. And the greater good is, making sure that, for me, I've started an online platform for people in grief every Monday night. It's faith-based, but I will make it non-denominational as we grow, and people come on to talk about their loved ones. There's no grief speak in our society.
No.
People don't speak grief. They don't know what to say. Yeah. But if we could speak grief, imagine how much that would be better for our society, where people can talk about the pain and not feel that they're burdening someone. Imagine if you could say to someone, mention that person's name. They have a name. Don't be afraid to mention Veronique or Sienna or Anthony. They have a name. Yeah. People don't know what to say. So my platform's called Heartfelt. I've established a website, heartfelt.community. So, you know, that's very, very important to me, working alongside Danny Layla on the I Forgive. We've introduced also, my husband Craig is very involved in the Road Trauma Support Group, which is a group that's been arranged, supported by New South Wales Police, and also Martha Jabor from the Homicide Victims Unit, where families come together and we're trying to help these families know, you know, around the education and reform for so many things that happen when you're a victim of a tragedy, where there's a crime that's occurred because of an incident. And so this group, the Road Trauma Support Group, is to help these families around, you know, CTP, around what happens in a judicial system, support to these families. And also we're opening up a coffee shop.
Oh, nice.
In the next week or so. And the coffee shop is called Quatre, which is 4 in French, honouring the 4 children. And the theme of the coffee shop is because love lives on. Just because somebody dies doesn't mean you stop loving them. No. And the price you pay for grieving, the price you pay for love is the grief. That's what, you know, that's what you go through because you love someone. You only grieve because you love. It hurts because you love. Yeah. And I think where forgiveness comes in is, again, part of the upbringing of having faith and being raised to know that you've got to forgive. If you forgive, you don't hold anger, you don't hold hatred, because that's contagious and it leads to so many things like depression and suicide and domestic violence and drugs, so many things. So I think forgiveness has been at the pivotal of what we've been raised as children, as family, and I walk through that journey every day, and making sure that forgiveness is at the realm of what I do. Forgiveness is what I teach my son. Nothing wrong with asking for someone for forgiveness, nothing wrong with being sorry, and I think that's really, really important. And I think before forgiveness, for many people, because you don't want people to resent us going, how could you forgive? How do you just forgive? And a lot of people are saying that doesn't sound right. But, you know, there is acceptance before forgiveness. And
so, like, grief is a process, forgiveness is a process as well?
Grief is a process, forgiveness is a process, and part of that process is acceptance. Accepting what happened, trying to make terms of what's taken place, trying to understand how you can work through that and create something that will make you and your family feel better. And that's part of the grief and forgiveness process. Because for a lot of people, it's just not easy to forgive. We've got to be very, very, very sure about saying that. But we can be examples of, if you do forgive, what would it look like? What steps? What does it mean for you? And certainly for me, I can at least get out of bed and still be the role model for my son, be a wife. I can't tell you that it's easy. I can't tell you it's not painful, and I can't tell you that some days I'm, you know, very elevated in anxiety. But I live with hope. I live with hope.
And that's part of your faith and being raised that way?
Yep, I was raised to Easter for Christians is the most important day of the year. It's when Christ was resurrected, and we believe that if we follow Christ's teachings and we, you know, and in life there is always suffering in life, and sometimes the only way to get through suffering is by suffering. And I've decided that the way I'm going to live my life is also to be a wounded healer. And there are many people that come onto Heartfelt's platform that are so wounded. And if I can try and play a little small role in healing what their wounds, just a small role, then that heals me a little bit too. And I feel that that's my pathway into, you know, the teachings of Christ. It's not about yourself. We live in a world of me, 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 me. But I want to be a servant. I want to do acts of service to those who were wounded. And that's part of my faith and part of my forgiveness.
Thank you so much for sharing everything that you've shared with us today and taking time out to come onto our podcast. There's a lot in there for people listening to take away and to learn from, and hopefully change themselves for the better. And I just want to thank you again for coming on.
Thank you, Nathan. And I really would love to be able to, you know, share my story where I can, if it gives people a little glimpse of hope. Because we all go through something in our life. Everybody has a story. Thanks,
Bridget.